Hey, I'm Ziv Shalev and this is On the Journey. Every week, On the Journey explores the intersection of wellness, spiritual inquiry, mental health, personal growth, and purposeful living through the eyes of people we interview. Diego, to begin, I'd love to hear a little about your spiritual background growing up and how this is evolved in your life to this day.
Okay, hello. Hi. First of all, I will not call it spiritual background, but just my background and my call it life experience. I grew up in Venice, Italy. So forgive me for my macaroni accent if you don't quite get it. I will try to regulate it. And I had average upbringing. I grew up in a not really actively Catholic family, but a family had the same Catholic values like it's pretty common in Italy. And when I went to the university, I did political science, which is economy, sociology, and philosophy, laws, and a little bit of psychology. I actually didn't quite. I was not quite happy with it because I soon enough realized how heavily ideological the approach was, and I actually was struggling with that, and I started to think about, well, this is not really quite right. It's not what education should be. And then after a few years, I had a regular job, and then I had my own business, but I kept that form of thinking there in my mind. And at a certain point, I decided to really start something, and that was over 10 years ago. So I started a project that is called the EOF Project, and the EOF stands for End of Fear. But at a certain point, I was no longer happy with the title, the name of the project, because I soon enough recognized how it created a lot of misinterpretations and misunderstandings. So by end of fear, I do not refer to what I will call it the natural fear, which we need, our instincts to protect ourselves because maybe there is a predator, or there is a fire, or there is an earthquake. I'm talking about primarily, or actually mainly, irrational fears we develop, and also our society develops, and then we come to believe, which I think that if we provide the people a training and an understanding of how to rationalize out irrational fears, we will definitely create an enormous betterment in our psychology and in our society as well, particularly in the field of mental disorder or even mental illness, actually. So this is fundamentally, in a nutshell, what the story of my, not the story of my life, but the story of how I came to develop this project. And with this, what I do with this project is coaching, yes. I don't like the term coaching, I prefer the term training, but I know that it's more appealing. But I also work with institutions, I work with universities, I do conferences and congresses to convey the same approach, to propose the same approach I have. And to finish this summary, I'm currently working on developing some educational programs that are aimed at refining people thinking skills fundamentally, using a methodology that I will call it, in a very simplistic form, I will call it a mix between applied critical thinking, what is known metacognition, that is the study and the comprehension of the way we think, and what is known as memetics, that is the study of means, like beliefs, units of cultures, and the first person that coined the term memes was evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, and he created a very interesting theory, the theory of memetics, which, personally speaking, I don't believe we can call it a science, but it's definitely a wonderful explanatory framework of analysis to understand things, to understand why we have certain beliefs and how the beliefs manage to replicate themselves successfully or not, and eventually causing also problems in many cases. This is fundamentally in a summary
Okay,
what I can say.
That's a very thorough summary, and I would love to understand, like, let's start from the basics. So it sounds like you're helping people with understanding or thinking about the things that they are not thinking rationally.
Yeah, in a very concise way, yes.
So
I don't. I'm sorry.
So I will make sure it's using a certain way of thinking to help with other way of thinking, right?
Yes, like for instance, why do we think the way we think? And most people don't really pay much attention on the fact that we all have been conditioned inevitably by, well, our genetic nature, our biology conditions us, and we are limited by the nature of our biology. You know, humans are biologically wired to be fallacious and fallible. We are fundamentally an irrational species. And particularly, why, I say, most people don't pay attention on how they are conditioned by all sorts of things, like the cultural upbringing, the tribe where they grew up, the family, the system of values, the system of agreeableness, the country, the nation, their life experiences, the books they've read, the shows they watched, and everything is conditioning. So my approach is to say this in just a line that is somehow complex, is can we think about the way we think without using the same thinking that created that thinking? So for example, if I am ideological, like hopefully not extreme with my ideology, that can be whatever. Well, I was not born with my ideology. It was not in my genes. I acquired that because of plenty of reasons. So what are those reasons? And that managed to make a mind think about that and adhere that and adopt that. But most importantly, can I think about my ideological thinking without using as a cognitive filter the same thinking that has created that thinking? Otherwise, I'm not going to understand anything. So what I usually apply is, again, in a nutshell, is something that is called primary principle thinking, which means it's very similar to physics as a framework of thinking. So what I mean by this is boiling everything down to the bottom truths, assuming there are truths. When we find the truths, or what I will call the valid premises behind our thinking, from there we reason it all up and we understand what is veracious, what is rational, and what is rubbish, what is garbage, what is we don't really need. It's very counterintuitive, but it's not impossible. And now the problem is that most people don't quite like this because we all like to protect our beliefs, whatever they are, because they give us a sense of identity, and they also satisfy somehow the primary need that we all share and have, which is the need to feel safe. That is what the brain wants, because if the brain doesn't feel safe, the brain doesn't feel, the mind does, but metaphorically, if the brain doesn't feel safe, it cannot operate properly. And therefore, well, we know, confusion and all this stuff. The problem is that what we think is safe to us is not necessarily true. It doesn't necessarily match reality, because maybe it's based on some illusion. This year, particularly with the pandemic, we saw skyrocketing of conspiracy theories, for example. The reason why, the reason that is behind that collective behavior and personal behavior is fundamentally what I just said. People want to feel safe. They don't feel safe because the future is uncertain. And when they want to feel safe, they take the shortcut. So instead of really reasoning, okay, what can I do? How is the condition of my thinking? They take the shortcut, and the shortcut is usually, well, it's usually about the most predictable of the human reactions, which is denial, blaming, and believing. And we know how the story usually goes.
Mm.
So I understand that, again, we want to feel safe, but it causes all sorts of troubles, and very likely also an increase of mental disorder, which then through time can slightly derange into mental illness. It's a big problem that we don't realize.
So Diego, in theory, it sounds like I can maybe imagine it, although it sounds a bit complicated. Can you give us like a specific case or an example from maybe one of your coaching sessions where someone came with a certain way of thinking that came from a certain life experience, and then how you help to recognize it and to change?
Yeah, I can provide you an example. Of course, I cannot mention any names,
Of course.
but a person that started what I like to call it training, but officially it's called coaching. A few years ago, I had many people that started this several years ago, actually, and is still there. And I had some new people, of course. This person had a problem with her imagination, fundamentally. And was not mentally ill, of course. I don't deal with people that have mental illness because I'm not qualified for it. When I have people with mental illness and I detect it, I redirect those people to professional, particularly non-religious psychologists and or psychiatrists, which I also work with. This person went into what you will probably know as New Age movement. So the modern spirituality, and which is very, very often combined with conspiracy theories. And it is mainly about the most crazy ideas, right? So this person suffered of a deterioration of her psychological state of mind. And I had actually several people that came to me and they had the same problem. So these people and this person wanted to understand what was true in those ideas and what was not true. But to my viewpoint, the approach I want to take when people are like that, I'm not in the condition to say what is true and what is not, because I don't have the universal knowledge. But that is not even relevant, by the way. So the first step is that I do have to somehow talk their language, not the English or whatever, but the archetypal, the archetypes they are using in order to create a bond. Because otherwise, if I say, nah, all of the stuff you believe is rubbish, well, that's not really a good way to create a bridge, and of course, is actually the best way to make the person disappear. So I do have to talk their language in a way aimed at staying away from believing. Believing is a big problem because it's a distraction to our psychology. It prevents attention, and it is fundamentally what I call monological. So it's one-way thinking, very binary. I believe that, and therefore that is true. So fundamentally, what I do also with this person, in this case, I explain them what the memes are in terms of ideas, not the internet memes, and what they do in our mind. Often they actually work like viruses of the mind, or parasites, if you like. I think it's a good way, in a very graphic way, to comprehend how an idea that causes confusion is fundamentally merely an idea. It's like a file we keep alive and we feed in our brain, in our mind. So by doing that, I create a dissociation, and not that, sorry, an indirect dissociation between how the person thinks and the ideas that that person carries. But the person at the beginning is not really quite aware of it, because the person is listening to my approach, and the person is not quite aware, and therefore the person doesn't feel that that I'm trying to demolish those beliefs, because that is not my intention anyway. What I want is, I want those people to dissociate themselves from their beliefs that are based on not valid premises, and to dismantle them themselves. I cannot do that for them. So fundamentally, this is what happened, and that took, initially took several months. I actually, about a year. Usually people I work with, they do the coaching for at least a year, because it is a good time frame to exercise their cognition, our cognitions, and to produce some rational results. I really don't think that something can be done within like 4, 8, even 10 sessions. I don't think it's possible. So fundamentally, what happened in that case, the person progressively understood how to separate her own thinking, the very activity of thinking, from the activity of forming thought patterns and ideas. And that is absolutely beneficial, because it's true, and this is a big part of my approach, that the way we think, the act of thinking is one cognitive operation of the mind. And the act of forming thought processes or ideas, opinions, is another one. They are not the same. And to my viewpoint, actually, most people do not really quite think. They actually stick to thought processes, ideas, and opinions, and therefore memories that have been there for a while, but it is not really an act of thinking that supervises and analyzes the stream of thought processes and all of that.
What do you mean? Sorry, I'm sorry to jump in. I want to understand. So do you mean that we have something like memories or all kinds of beliefs, and then when you say we don't think about them in a way like we don't reflect about them, we don't analyze them, we just let them be and take them as a fact? And when you say to think about it, it means to what? To just observe them and try to understand them in a deeper way?
Yeah, fundamentally, imagine our thought processes, our ideas, our opinions, our memories. Imagine that if you picture that as a network, right, a network of files, who is observing that network? Is there an observer or a thinker? Or are we merely playing around in that network? You know, in order to understand a labyrinth, a maze, like an actual labyrinth, you have two choices. You are in the labyrinth and you struggle around finding and memorizing all the paths, or you observe the labyrinth from above, so you have a better understanding. In that case, there is an observer there, which is what I call an actual thinker, that observes without verbalizing, without naming, observes the networks and how the network works, which is, by the way, how science primarily works. It's not based on judgment; it's based on observation, and then we come up with theories that we want to find out if the theories are accurate, and if they are not, we move on with better theories. So, for example, a methodology used in science, the scientific method, is not about we have a theory and we want to find out elements capable of validating our theory. It's not about that, not anymore at least. It is about we have a theory and we want to find out at least a single element or premise capable of disproving our theory, which is very counterintuitive, but is very important because it's also about minimizing time we invest in theories. So if I have a scientific theory, I really want to find out at least a single element capable of disproving my theory so that I can move on with a better theory. But if I think in terms of, oh, that's my theory, and I have been developing the theory for the last 5 years, well, then I'm psychologically interfacing myself with that theory. And that is no longer scientific, I'm sorry. It's more ideological and personal.
Definitely. So Diego, we are approaching to the end of the interview, and I want to try and understand maybe the last question. And it's a really good example to when you look how science works. So when you talk about the thinker, okay, or the one that observes, and in one way, we really try to protect our beliefs and the way of thinking. Like, it's crucial for most of us to be very protective, because otherwise it's horrible to discover that our beliefs, the way of thinking wasn't optimal or wasn't right. So we really want to protect it. And then there is this observer that can observe it and discover that we were maybe wrong, or maybe it was built on something that is not the best thing for us. So how do you separate? How can you, on one way, observe and another way not get stuck into the thought itself that just want to protect its survival because it's so frightening to let go?
Well, I have it's a difficult question, but I know how to answer the question, but it will take another probably 4 hours. Okay. So I will try.
I challenge you. You have 1 minute. I challenge you to answer it in 1 minute.
I will try to synthesize that and in a graphic form, because visual contents are more impacting than written contents. Well, this is what I usually do. I will ask people, why are you afraid of acknowledging that your beliefs are not quite right? Because you're not going to die. It's not a matter of life or death. You are going to live, no problem. So why are you so afraid? Where that fear comes from, and what are the premises behind that fear? Is it because it is linked to your identity, your sense of identity? Well, the answer is usually yes. But then I propose, okay, what is that you really want connected with your sense of identity? Do you want your sense of identity connected to a belief? Or you want your sense of identity connected with the thinker, which is what you are supposed to be? So the thinker is supposed to be alive, an active psychological agent that explores everything, and not constantly in a serious way, but we need a humor, we need fun, we need distraction, but is the supervisor that really administers the mind. The identity instead doesn't do that. And from a neurological viewpoint, our identities and our beliefs are based on dopamine, which is, feeling safe, feeling happy. And what they call the thinker or the observer, they are based on serotonin, the serotonin level, which is what makes us managerial. So long story short, what I ask people is that what you really want, particularly with your relationship with beliefs, your beliefs, do you want the confidence or do you want to build a psychological competence? Are two different things. Well, if we want to mainly cling to confidence, which is what most people like to do, well, it's nice, but then we are going to summon troubles, confusion, insecurity, contradiction. If instead we train ourselves to build a psychological competence, so we become a managerial and we become able to administer the way we think. And then very likely confidence will come into being spontaneously and here and there. This stuff, by the way, should be a matter of study in education, which is what I'm trying to do right now. Actually, I'm working with some psychologists, psychiatrists, and policymakers and educators, try to produce some thinking model, a thinking model, and to be proposed in some educational institutions that will be launched actually next year. So fundamentally, in a nutshell, psychological confidence or psychological competence? Well, the thinker is psychological competence.
Confidence versus competence. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Diego, thank you so much for this deep, complicated, mind-blowing, interesting, and provoking interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too.